Feminist film theory, also known as screen theory, has analyzed the stereotypical representations of women, gender roles in film, and the role of film in social, historical, and psychological constructions of gender. It has highlighted notions of identification, voyeurism, and fetishism. Since the 1970s, feminist film criticism has drawn upon Freudian and Lacanian psychoanalysis and structuralist Marxism. Laura Mulvey's essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, has had an enormous impact on film theory, establishing a framework for further feminist film criticism. In the 1970s and early 1980s, Mulvey and her husband Peter Wallin collaborated on experimental films dealing with female experience, male fantasies, and patriarchal myths, most renowned of which was Riddles of the Sphinx. In her seminal essay Visual Pleasure, Mulvey uses psychoanalytic theory as a political weapon to demonstrate how the unconscious of patriarchal society has structured film form. She suggests that the function of woman in forming the patriarchal unconscious is twofold. She symbolizes the threat of castration and enables her child to enter the symbolic order. The cinema raises questions about how the unconscious structures ways of seeing and the pleasure we experience in looking. The pleasures offered by cinema include scopophilia, means love of looking, which Freud identified as one of the components of sexuality. Mainstream film reproduces this surreptitious observation of portraying a hermetically sealed world indifferent to the audience's presence. The contrast between the dark auditorium and the brilliant shifting patterns on the screen promotes the illusion of voyeuristic separation and looking into a private world. Mulvey argues that these two modes of pleasure are contradictory. Scopophilic pleasure derives from objectifying a person as an object of sexual stimulation, while narcissistic pleasure comes from identifying with the image seen. The first implies separation from the object on the screen, and the second, an identification with it. This contradiction between ego and libido is found in the fantasy world created by cinema. In a world ordered by sexual imbalance, pleasure in viewing has been divided between active male and passive female roles. The male gaze is determining, while the female figure is characterized by to be looked atness. The woman's visual presence tends to interrupt the progression of the story and freeze the flow of action in moments of erotic contemplation. Traditionally, the woman displayed has been an erotic object for both the characters within the screen story and the spectator. In contrast, the male protagonist is forward the action as a controlling figure with whom the spectator can identify. The spectator projects his look onto the protagonist, whose power to control events coincides with the active power of the erotic look, giving a satisfying sense of omnipotence. The male movie star assumes the role of the ideal ego, conceived in the original moment of recognition in the mirror. Thus, the spectator both subjects a woman in the film to a scopophilic look and recognizes his like in the male star, through whom he gains control of the woman within the diegesis. However, the female also connotes the threat of castration and ultimately sexual difference, which threatens to evoke the anxiety it originally signified. There are two avenues of escape from this castration anxiety: a sadistic voyeurism asserting control over the guilty person, or fetishistic scopophilia, which can exist outside linear time since the erotic instinct is focused on the look alone. For Mulvey, the place of the look defines cinema, the possibility of varying it and exposing it. Cinema builds the mode of looking into the spectacle itself, with three looks associated with cinema: the camera recording, the audience watching the final product, and the characters at each other in the film. The conventions of narrative film subordinate the first two to the third, but the structure of looking contains a contradiction. The female image as a castration threat constantly endangers the unity of the diegesis, and burst through the world of illusion as an intrusive, static, one dimensional fetish. Mulvey suggests that the institution of cinema is deeply structured by the unconscious demands of the male ego, and her proposed remedy regarding the camera's materiality is analogous to the demand by many feminists that the body be restored in its foundational role as constitutive of human thought and emotion.